The New Zealand Waitangi Tribunal. Just gravy train milkers? The original Treaty of Waitangi was written in English by Governor William Hobson and James Busby, and that's an important fact in today's volatile descendant racist days. At the time the treaty was signed, the English were relatively educated and intelligent, but the same could not be said of the other side, who were relatively uneducated. And also they were brutal, violent, warring, savage cannibals, who not only murdered their neighbors and their children, they ate them as well. This is also an important fact. Common sense dictates that the British colonizers, who were relatively civil colonizers going by the standards in those days, deliberately chose not to conquer and kill the inhabitants of New Zealand. It's highly likely if the Spanish, Portuguese, French, or the Belgians arrived instead of the British, there would be no treaty, and probably no Maori inhabitants would have survived the invasion and be around today to milk the gravy train. The British instead chose to embrace the Maori inhabitants, treat them all as British subjects, pass on massive benefits and knowledge covering food, clothing, housing, transport, hygiene, health, property rights, introduction of law, stop slavery, stop infanticide, protect women and children, and of course, stop cannibalism. In return, the Maori inhabitants signed a treaty which ceded absolutely to the British Crown, a complete legally binding cession. Fact. It's a complete fallacy, and make-believe wishful thinking, to reason under the circumstances prevailing in New Zealand in 1840, that the British would in their wildest dreams say to the Maori inhabitants, "Hey guys, can we be in partnership with you? Oh please, pretty please." This partnership nonsense is, to put it bluntly, simply racist garbage dreamed up by gravy train milkers like the Waitangi Tribunal. Common sense dictates that both parties knew what was going on, and knew what they were getting in exchange for the treaty. This was a peaceful treaty settlement whereby the Maori inhabitants not only got to live, they got the opportunity to turn their standard of living from violent misery into a comparatively much better world of living in luxury with a much longer lifespan. In return, the British acquired New Zealand by peaceful legally binding cession. Fact. It should also be noted immediately that there are no principles of the treaty. Fact. Slowly over time, through slack government policy, and eventually, deliberate total abuse by the Waitangi Tribunal, like a spreading cancer, fantasy meanings and principles were dreamt up and inserted into government policy over the years, which sadly, New Zealanders started to take as gospel. But, nonetheless, these race-based principles, which were totally false, were clandestinely getting inserted into government policy. Today, we continually hear about race-based policy being subject to the Treaty of Waitangi, funds for journalists, jumping the health queue, department names. It never stops, but it is all based on a false premise and deliberate manipulation by the racist Waitangi Tribunal. If anyone gets to interpret the meaning of the Treaty of Waitangi, it should be the descendants of the British, and definitely not the descendants of the uneducated, brutal, violent, warring, savage cannibals. That's obviously common sense. Fact. The solution to this time-consuming, expensive, divisive mess is simple. Either build into law that there are no principles of the treaty, which is fact, and remove out of government policy and legislation any and all references to the treaty. Or define the principles of the treaty and have them legislated into law, preferably after a public discussion and referendum on the matter. And, as a little bonus to hard-working decent New Zealanders, get rid of the incompetent and totally racist Waitangi Tribunal as soon as possible. And, clearly, get rid of the racist council Maori wards and the racist electoral Maori seats as well. Stand up for your country. Thank you for listening. Geraint, on behalf of WhangareiTim.